Good afternoon, everybody, and a happy Thirsty Thursday. I say Thirsty Thursday today, especially because it is hot out. So I hope everyone is staying hydrated in the heat. At least it's hot in New York. I'm sure it's hot in most of the Northeast, and I'm sure it's hot in most of the country, no matter where you are, or most of the world. Who knows where you're logging in from, hopefully from all over the place. And yes, it's very hot. And as you might know, I don't like the heat. For some reason, I'm wearing a sweater. I don't know how I'm pulling this off. Probably because I don't love the heat. I'm trying to pretend it's cold. Because, I don't know if some of you know, I do have an alter ego that maybe I should start a Twitch channel for too, Dr. Snow or Sir Nicky Gamble the 40th. So I think maybe the Twitch coming up in the future to talk about snowology. I don't know, but either way, that's not the point. As hot as it is today, as excited as people are to be outside in this weather, except for me, as I said, I'm happy you're here on the Unqork Twitch channel because we have, I think it's going to be a pretty fun one, as I'm going to talk to everybody about Codeless Architecture. Now, you've probably heard Codeless Architecture before from us, maybe from other people, maybe someone walking down the street, you overhear them. I think there's a Twitter account like Overheard in New York. I'm sure somebody overhears somebody else now walking around the streets of New York talking about Codeless because it's all the rage, in our opinion. But you've heard us talk about it in a lot of different ways. I want to talk about it, obviously, today in a very developer-centric way. And that's going to be our focus. So we're going to go through Codeless Architecture. I'm actually going to do something I never thought I'd do on this Twitch, which is share a presentation, like a deck. I didn't make it. I don't make decks. That's not my specialty. I stick to no code. And I guess, I don't know. I guess presentations are like no code in a sense. Either way, going to do a presentation, a little overview of Codeless Architecture, and then we're going to get into some demos of the things you can do with Codeless Architecture. Now, that being said, look, we've been doing this for a couple months now, whatever it is, and everything we've shown you is because of Codeless Architecture, right? Now, we always talk about it really as no code because it is the no-code platform of Unqork that is helping us to deliver this and create these things that we've been presenting to you. And a lot of it is how you use Unqork in these Twitches. But it's all because of Codeless Architecture. So while everything you saw before is a product of Codeless Architecture, the demos today are really going to be focused on trying to highlight just the Codeless Architecture itself and not necessarily all of the business use cases and the other things that our clients are doing with Unqork, that our creators are doing with Unqork and the like. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And like I promised you, I'm going to almost time that perfectly, my producer. That's on me. So the first thing that this is also coinciding with is CodelessArchitecture.org is officially live. So this is the first thing that I want to show is CodelessArchitecture.org. Where you can find a lot of the information I'm going to talk about today. You'll find the graphics from the presentation I'm going to walk through. You'll find white papers. You'll find some webinars, videos that we recorded. Actually, one of the demos, you'll see another version of it in the webinar. You'll have our blog, and you'll also get a link to GitHub where we'll be posting the actual Codeless Architecture definition that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So definitely check out CodelessArchitecture.org and definitely click stay in the know and, subscribe to receive updates about Codeless Architecture, just like you all have hopefully now subscribed to this Twitch channel and continue to come back. So check that out. It's only going to get better and better of a website. And this is a really great video that highlights some of the benefits of it. All right, let's jump over to presentation though. Okay, now I'm kind of afraid I'm going to hit slideshow. And if anyone tells me you can't see it, hopefully you can. So, before even talking about Codeless Architecture, just to set some context here, let's talk about serverless architecture. Right? Because whether it's codeless or it's serverless, the idea is all about abstraction, right? Extracting away from you some of the things that need to happen, that always need to happen in order to build great software, right? And that lives on the hardware and lives on the software. So hardware has always been kind of the first place where this kind of abstraction has happened. So let's look at this, timeline. You used to have physical machines. Right? People would actually own a server in their closet, in maybe a data center, but there was a physical server basically for each thing that needed a server, right? Lots of servers, lots of money, lots of, you're buying a bunch of, resources that you may never use because you have to buy the physical machine, right? And it's almost a one-to-one relationship there. Then there was some abstraction to that, right? There were virtual machines, which said, hey, now you can actually install multiple effective servers onto one server, right? So I can have multiple operating systems. I can have multiple different operating systems running within one server, right? Containers took that to the next level, which said, great, virtual machines are amazing, and they've led to tremendous cost savings and so on and so forth, but they're massive, right? You still need to package the operating system and everything else that comes along with it. So then containers came in and said, hey, we can reduce this down a lot, and we can still have these isolated environments, but that share things. So the actual deployment process and maintenance process becomes a lot easier, right? And then you go to the far right of this diagram and you see serverless, where you don't even need to basically set up a server at all. You just write some functionality, and one of these many abstractors like an AWS, Azure, GCP, anyone else who's creating these options for you, they handle all that. Spin it up when they need it, shut it down when they don't. I actually don't even know the inner workings of it, because that's the idea of it, right? That you don't know the inner workings. And in the webinar that's up on codelessarchitecture.org, there's a great line from our CTO who gives this presentation on Codeless that says, if you ask an IT leader what servers their applications are running on, they probably don't know, and they should not care. I think that's really important when it comes to really both serverless and codeless. And honestly, look, you can even take this graph down into the left, even further and further and further. I think I might have given this example in a previous Twitch, but like hardware was always kind of easy to abstract, like a car, right? That's an abstraction of hardware. All you see is a wheel and two pedals. You don't need to know how the engine works. So that the abstraction of hardware it's been around, and it was, kind of the first place where we saw a lot of gains. Codeless is trying to do that to software, right? Because now that we've basically abstracted away and simplified what used to be, and still is, don't get me wrong. I mean, managing all those containers and everything is still not easy and requires some very bright engineers in any given team to do, but it is a far better situation than they were in, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it may be. Let's do the same thing with the software, which has obviously been a lot tougher to do, but there is that history of the abstraction of software development. We start with high-level languages on this list, but it goes again even further down into the left, where you're talking about assembly languages, right? Before you even got to the higher level languages. Higher level languages allow you to write code that's human readable, that makes sense to someone looking at it, right? Then you had frameworks, right? Frameworks come along and say, hey, you don't need to custom roll your own user auth and your own routing engine and your own object relational mappers, your own database connections. We'll build all that for you, follow a few conventions, use our framework, and you're good to go, abstracting away some of those repetitive things, right? That everybody needs. Low code and code generators were the next, where it says, hey, if you follow a very formulaic way of doing something, we can provide you that low code interface and generate code for you for things, again, as long as you kind of follow the rules. But for everything else, you got to write code, which is why it's low code, because it can't do everything, right? They can only do the stuff that you do the way that they say to do it. Then you get to no code, right? Like Unqork, where it's actually creating the entire thing visually. So you're no longer forced to inject code where the platform doesn't support, because the platform will support it, because it gives you the right amount of building blocks to construct the things you need to construct, right? Codeless architecture is the next evolution of that, okay? It is no code, but so much more. And I'm going to talk in a second about what those things are that make it so much more. But when you start to do that, when you start to take all of these various things and you express it in the codeless architecture, you no longer have to worry about different definitions of the same logic represented in low code or no code. You can see exactly the declarative nature of what it is that you're building, right? And understand it. So codeless architecture, serverless architecture, the two together, forget about it. Okay, so let's actually dig into the three main pillars of codeless architecture here. Now, again, this is Unqork, really, right? But it's Unqork kind of evolved in taking the elements of Unqork that has made it so successful and made it so powerful and has enabled our creators to build the things they're able to build, and formalizing it into an architecture. And what's most exciting to me, opening that architecture up. Okay, and I'll get to that and that excitement in a second. So first of all, you have an IDE, right? So an interactive development environment, a place where you're actually doing your building. So your coders out there are probably going to be in a VS Code or something of that nature. In Unqork world, you're inside of Unqork, okay? But the idea is you need a world-class visual IDE, but we want to ensure that what comes out of that is something consistent, okay? So regardless of the interface that you create, the resulting product is this codeless definition. Okay, so what is the codeless definition? We've probably shown you in past Twitches JSON, right? JavaScript object notation, a very common format to transfer data all over the web, represent data, configuration data, you name it. So that is what Unqork has always been using to reflect your business logic in a declarative way that's very portable. Okay, so the IDE's responsibility is to generate the logic according to the codeless definition. Okay. Now, again, Unqork has a great one. We love it, but it doesn't need to be Unqork's, right? It could be some new IDE that somebody creates that they think is even better. It could be a different IDE that already exists, but it's currently creating things in a different format. How can we get that to follow along to the codeless definition? And then lastly, there's the runtime. Okay. The runtime says, I'm going to actually render in some cases, or I'm going to understand the codeless definition. I'm going to do something with it, right? So that could be in your browser. That's a runtime engine. The browser actually constructing the UI that you've defined in the codeless definition. It could be an API, right? The server running code, or running that logic with code on the server that is reflected in your codeless definition. It could become mobile. It could become, you'll see a couple other examples later. If you saw my LinkedIn post, it could be Slack, right? And we're going to show that. Okay, so these are the three primary elements of the codeless architecture. And what I'm really going to focus on today is what that codeless definition gets you, right? We're going to show stuff that relates to IDEs. We're going to talk about how IDEs come into codeless architecture. We're going to talk about how runtime engines come into codeless architecture, but it's all made possible because of the codeless definition. And again, that's what excites me the most. And particularly of that codeless definition, the fact that it is open. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. Yeah, so the future state, right, is this open standard. All right, so opening up the codeless definition, because what happens is in any, look at the no code and low code market. It is booming, right? Unqork, we're not the only ones out there doing this, right? We're the best ones, we're not the only ones. Okay, but the idea that it's growing and growing and growing. So all of a sudden, you have all of these different people doing things in very different ways, which makes, if you go back to this slide, you have IP lock-in. You build something in another no-code platform, you're locked into that no-code platform, right? So opening it up helps to deal with that fragmentation, right? Now, I'm not going to say that every single no-code platform is suddenly going to start using the codeless definition, but it doesn't have to. I'm going to show you how it doesn't have to and how, Unqork, and we actually have examples of how that doesn't need to be them changing it, but adhering to the codeless standard is what's important. Somebody adhering to it and some way to transform into it is what is truly important, right? Because openness, it's going to help low code, it's going to help no code, particularly no code, right? But it's helped so many different things already. That concept of open within software development, right? I talked about, I gave a mention to a comment that, our CTO had made about, not knowing and not caring what software your application is running on, or what hardware your application is running, what operating system your application is running on, right? They don't care. But I can almost guarantee you it's Linux, right? Now, maybe you're a Microsoft shop and you're using, their server, but more than likely you're using Linux under the covers. And I'm sure most of you know, Linux is open source. All right. So Linus Torvalds built an operating system and said, hey, everybody, go do whatever you want with it. Right. And then boom, it exploded. Right. You have all these other variations of Linux that you can run on your laptops, on your desktops, and you have it powering the majority of the servers in the world because of the fact that it started as open source. Right. Open standards are doing the same thing. JSON, again, being an open standard that the codeless definition is built on top of. Once JSON was opened up and kind of created that standard, the API economy exploded because now people had a consistent, reliable, and performant way to connect systems together, right? You see it with browsers, browser standards, HTML, CSS standards. I'm sure many of you remember the days when Internet Explorer 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and I can just continue counting everything up until Edge, didn't follow any browser standards, right? And life was pretty bad, not gonna lie, right? People had to create things like jQuery, and I mean, maybe it led to the Anglers and the Reacts of the world, which were good in the end, but the reason for it in many ways was because people weren't following standards. Your stuff worked in Chrome and Firefox and Safari, heck, even Opera, no problem. You get to IE, doesn't work, or somebody builds something using specific IE drivers and then it doesn't work in the other browsers. It was a nightmare for web developers to handle it because people weren't adhering to open standards. That starts to happen. By the way, also many of these browsers are built on the open source Chromium, browser platform. All of a sudden, those problems go away and everyone's able to evolve. I'm able to use Chrome extensions and Edge and vice versa. The examples can keep going with web development. So think about those concepts, and then that should kind of get you to really, really understand what this could do for the future of not just no code, but also software development as a whole, right? And listen, like, you can say what you want about the FANGs of the world and, whether how great of companies they are or not. But one thing that you can't argue that they don't do is they create amazing software, right? And what so many of them are then doing is open sourcing that software, right? Kubernetes from Google, React from Facebook or Meta now, right? They're opening up the technologies that they create to make the world a better place. And in many ways, to me, this is Unqork standing alongside some of the most innovative technology companies in the world, creating the open standard and codeless architecture to have what we hope and what we really believe will be the same impact on technology. Wow, sorry. I hope that was interesting. Sorry for putting you through a presentation for that long, but I hope that kind of gets that element of codeless architecture in your minds and have you thinking about it that way. But now, let's get into the real fun stuff and let's actually show what you can really build with codeless architecture. Okay. So the first part of it I want to show is from the IDE part, right? Because what we're saying is, while Unqork's Designer is a world-class visual IDE for building software, there are other IDEs out there, right? It could be code. It could be a ServiceNow, a Salesforce. Look, I mean, you see the icons here. If you recognize those icons, you know what I'm going to be talking about. But it could be any one of those. And with the codeless definition, it doesn't matter, right? So you can pull those things in. You can pull those things into the codeless definition. So that's what we're going to do first and foremost today. We are going to show, I got locked out. We're going to show pulling something that was built in a different IDE into Unqork. Okay. So I'm going to go grab that real quick because I logged out and I lost it. So let's take ServiceNow as an example. Okay. I've built an application in ServiceNow. I've defined a data model in ServiceNow. Oh, I got kicked out. I got kicked out because I had to restart my browser to give the sharing permissions again. So I'm going to have to go and I'm going to have to log back in. I honestly don't understand. When we talk about world-class visual IDEs, look, ServiceNow is a great platform, but I can't figure out how to log into the darn thing. There's like 12 login pages, and I never know which one's the right login page. So I'm going to just go down here, and I'm going to grab, you know what? I will just skip the login right now. But basically, what we're going to do is here, we're going to take this object that we built inside of ServiceNow. We're going to migrate it into Unqork and click of a button. Okay, so it's got a bunch of fields defined in ServiceNow that I'm pulling into Unqork. All right, so I'm just going to say, hey, it's ServiceNow, Salesforce, Power Apps, Airtable, spreadsheets, and JSON schema. I'm going to show you spreadsheets too, but these are some of the examples we already have to pull things in to the codeless definition and into Unqork in a click of a button. Right, so I'll take ServiceNow here, and I will hit migrate. Okay, so it's going to work for a second, maybe a couple seconds. And when this wheel stops, I'm going to be ready to show you the next thing. Cool. So that That's up and running now. So what did that do, right? So, all right, I clicked the button migrate, but what I'm actually getting out of clicking the button migrate, all right? So I'm going to jump back into Designer now and show you what that got me, okay? So that got me here inside of this integrate application. That got me a new module called Service Now with the name of the object that I gave it, right? And inside of that module are, believe it or not, all the fields that came out of ServiceNow. Okay, so this was my data model over there, inclusive of a number of the business rules, right? So this is a field here where it's read only. Okay, so it's a field that gets set through some logic and you can't edit it. So that transferred over as well. The types transferred over. Checkboxes, this here should be a drop down, so the type of the field also transformed over as well. We also got connectors. All right, so we have pre-built plugins. I think many folks are familiar with plugins now at Unqork. Pre-built plugins that allow you to send data or pull data back, create, read, update, delete data from ServiceNow. All of that generated for you right off the bat. Okay, actually get a little more. All right, we got snippets. Okay, so folks are probably familiar with snippets. We talked about snippets last week with the marketplace, the webhook API snippet being one of them. We got a bunch of snippets. So I'll come over here, I'll click Service Now. And we've got snippets now. We have snippets that are available here, but of course, where they're really importantly available to you is over here. If I search for Service Now, I have snippets for each of the properties that came over from ServiceNow. So I can easily reuse those pre-built components throughout my entire application. Okay, so I'm going to do this migration one more time. And this time, I'll do it with a spreadsheet. All right, and before actually, let me just show you the spreadsheet. All right, so here it is. This is just a definition, a data dictionary, let's call it, within a spreadsheet where I say what type I want and the key and the label and so on and so forth. Now, it follows Unqork's naming conventions, but you can certainly map other naming conventions that may exist in spreadsheets. But the idea is I can take a spreadsheet, I can upload that spreadsheet and hit migrate. It'll work. That one works a little bit faster because it's not connecting back into ServiceNow to pull the data. And I refresh again. And of course, I get another module with all the fields reflected, right? Even file components reflected. And then, of course, when you go over to this snippets dashboard, you're going to get the snippets to relate to it as well. Okay. So now I'm basically ready to go to start building on top of all of the stuff that I had originally set up in ServiceNow, transforming from their definition into the codeless definition. Okay. I want to show you how that actually happened. Okay. So the first thing is, again, codeless definition is just JSON. Okay? So actually, if I click one of these snippets, you'll see the JSON. This is the JSON that defines the sys ID or the unique ID, right? Let's choose cost. This is the JSON that defines the cost field from ServiceNow, right? So we're basically creating this. All right, I want to show you again how we went about creating this. Okay, so the first thing, and I have this module up in a second, is just a transformation module. All right, this is like any ETL. Basically, you need something which takes in some data, transforms it, and puts it somewhere else, right? And that's what this transformation module is doing. Again, everything I'm showing you also built with Codeless Architecture inside of Unqork, right? And all that happens is, you make a call out to ServiceNow, you get some data back from their API to say, this is the definition you have. Again, they not to say that they don't have a definition. I was obviously able to do this because Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Airtable, and Power Apps, they all have some way of describing their, some elements, not all. I think that's one thing I maybe didn't highlight is the Codeless architecture. It defines everything, right? It doesn't define your data. In many of these systems, what I'm pulling in is I'm pulling in like some data and some business rules. On Unqork, you're defining everything, right? You're defining the UI, you're defining the connectors, you're defining the data all within the codeless definition, right? But I'm pulling that back with a plugin, and I'm doing a simple transformation. Now, if you've never seen the data workflow before, maybe you're like, whoa, this is crazy. If you have seen the data workflow before, you're like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward, right? And let me just show you how straightforward it is. Again, pulling from a plugin where I extracted the model out of ServiceNow. I'm just going to filter out inactive fields, right? I'm going to filter out any field where the element doesn't have a length. Like, I don't know why. I might submit a bug to ServiceNow. I don't know why there are fields in their API that don't have a property ID in them, but it is what it is. Easy to deal with, right? I filter out these function fields. I basically take out any system fields, with the exception of the primary key, which I want to capture as its own field. I do want that ID. And that's it, right? And then down here, plug choices, that was for dropdowns. I want to know what the available choices are. I merge those two together and I'm done, right? Now I basically transformed the ServiceNow data model, basically the same workflow. Data workflow exists for each one of those sources. Transform that into something that can be then converted into the codeless definition, okay? So that's it from a ServiceNow perspective, okay? So then how did I get it into, what I showed you over here? These individual discrete codeless definition representations of those data models, okay? So in order to do that, we use an API, okay? So we have a new API, at least in the codeless environment, which allows you to, first and foremost, see what's available to generate in the codeless definition, okay, to get back that JSON for any given type. So down here, you'll see, Boolean, button, calculator, currency, date, time, decision, dropdown, so on and so on and so on. Okay. So this API, if you just hit it plainly, it's going to give you back the available, components. If I go a step further, if I throw on string and I've got some data there, and if I hit just string, pretend I didn't put any data there because it's a GET request, right? So there's no body. It's going to give me back the properties. So it's going to define to me, hey, for a string, if I want to get back a string, then these are the options that I can provide. Okay. Now, of course, the documentation can be even better, and it can tell you what, like, hey, key is also a string and required is a Boolean, but that's obviously coming as we go to publish that codeless specification up on codelessarchitecture.org. So make sure you stay in tune with codelessarchitecture.org. And then lastly, if I switch this over to a put and I pass it through, now I get back to JSON, right? I said, hey, all I need to say is I need a label, key, max length, and required, and I get back the full JSON, inclusive of some other fields that as a user, I don't need to worry about, right? I get all of that back and I can go use that, okay? That's my understanding of the codeless architecture. Now, I want to talk to folks a little bit about, well, how did this API actually get built? And how did we construct, at least how did I construct this, right? So, and something might have jumped out to some people as I'm talking through, going through this list here. Maybe you notice down here that currency is a type, okay? And if you're very familiar with Unqork, you might be saying to yourself, well, Unqork doesn't have a currency component, right? So how is currency an available option in this API? Because in reality, when you think about, Unqork's components from a codeless architecture perspective and that codeless definition perspective, there are so many more types that exist in Unqork than you may think just by looking at the components that are on the page, right? So Unqork, again, doesn't have, and I'll jump over to this page again. So cost, right? This was a currency. This is of type currency, okay? It's a number component, yeah, but it's a number component that has format as currency checked and thousands separator checked, right? That's a currency component, okay? You don't need to know that. If you're trying to get back and say, hey, I need to create a new currency type, or I need to, generate some JSON for a currency, you don't need to know that it's a number with format as currency, because the definition can define that, and then the component is just an interface to get at that, right? Similarly, there were examples in here like float and integer, okay? Float having decimal values and integers not being whole numbers, right? Again, Unqork has a number component, but it has floats and integers, right? Because there's this setting here that says don't allow decimals, right? So if I have this unchecked as it is by default, that means the number inherently is more of a float, right? Because it's going to, if you type in 1, it's going to store 1.0, or at the very least, it will allow you to enter 1.0. If I were to check this box, now this component becomes an integer component, right? So there are so many more types that come out through the codeless definition that you can easily interface with, and all that, right? So let's actually, go a step further and say, okay, well, how did you actually, how do we generate that kind of stuff, right? So I'll jump back over here, go into export. Oh, sorry, I won't. I'll go into import again. I'm going to go down to the components API. So this is the module that's getting hit that I was hitting through Postman. All right, and there's a feature that's being used in this module called the API layer, called execute as proxy. It's in our documentation, execute as proxy. I know some of you out there might know as the API layer. But bottom line is you can basically treat this one module almost like a controller. If you're familiar with MVC architectures, model view controller. So it's a controller where you can have multiple different endpoints effectively served from the same module. So if I go into here, right, you'll see all of my different types. So that was the ones that were in the API when I did the get without a type at the end, right? So if I click currency, I'm going to get back this, right? So this is Unqork's transform section, which allows you to basically write JSON and format your JSON, very nicely and very visually. So in this case, we're saying, hey, what is a currency component? A currency component is nothing but a number component with set format as currency equal to true. Okay, so it said, all right, great. So it's a component number. So I'll come down here because this is the base level component, and I said, okay, it's a component number. So what's a component number? A component number is a number field with potentially a value called format as currency passed in. Okay, and then that's a subset of a data component, right? Because Unqork has, more or less 3 categories of components, but a number component is typically storing data, right? So that's a subset of our data component. We come up again and we find component data in here, right? And now you'll see what is a data component. It has the settings of a component that are relevant to data, right? So persistent, for example, whether or not to store data in the database is something that's exclusive to a data component. You're not storing, the data of a columns component. You're not storing the data of a calculator. You're storing the data of your data component. So that should only exist within a data component, right? But ultimately, it is still a component. So we finally follow this, let's call it inheritance model, like folks who are familiar with object-oriented programming might see, some of that shining through in here. You look at component and then here, okay, now you're looking at some of the fields that are just everywhere, right? Everything has a key and a label. Everything can be enabled or disabled. Everything we're tracking who creates it and who modifies it. Everything has a type, right? So we're building on top of these base structures, at least in this API, to kind of create the definition of each and to expose, more combinations of settings or components that are representative of different types of data that you can reflect in any given application. Okay, great. So I've shown you now how we're getting data into Unqork. And of course, could show you that you can then collect that data. You have all the plugins. You can then send that data back out to the system, by tying together a button with that plug create. And if I jump back over to the example of the ServiceNow one, right? I can just easily throw in a button in here. I can have it trigger. I'll do event here, trigger, plug, create, and I'm done, right? When I hit create, because again, look, I don't know if you saw, inside the plug create, it's all the mapping. All the mappings are there for you already, right? So since I got kicked out of ServiceNow and I can't log back in right now, I'm going to show you in Salesforce because I also did plug the Salesforce version of it. And there's another more involved version of like what I'm about to show that was on Coffee and No Code last week that is up on that Codeless Architecture. It's on this page in webinar. where I'm just like sticking my tongue out here. You can go watch this video and you'll see, again, you'll see our CTO talking about those slides, and you'll see the other kind of like user-facing part of this demo. But because this is for, I'm here for you developers today, I really want to focus on the back-end side of it and what made it all work, right? But let's just say, for argument's sake, let me take Salesforce either way. I'll come down here. I've got my submit button already, right? And actually event, I have done this already. So boom, event calls plug create, right? And I'm just going to come down here. I'll save, I'll preview. I will type in the customer is Twitchy McTwitch. The company is Twitch. And the email is Twitch, we'll say Unqork. Can't type right now, Twitch at Unqork.com. I'll hit submit. I'll just open the network. Hit submit, boom, execute. What did I do? Cannot deserialize. All right. You get the point. I think, folks, I shouldn't have even showed that side of it, right? Because it's going to go wrong. But you're able to now take this in, hook it into the plugins, send the data right back. Just as simple as that. Okay. Awesome. So, and then it would reflect over here. Because look, we have examples. This was, Harry, which I think is Gary Hoberman, creating one again directly from Unqork. So you have the mechanism to pull in, because we pulled in Salesforce, we pulled in the custom object there, we pulled in the things from Airtable. If I pull this up again, it's going to show the examples again. Go watch the demo and see how that all comes together on Codeless Architecture, actually through a workflow, even a more fun way to go about it. Go check all that out. It's pretty great. But now I want to show you, I want to switch gears over to the other side of Codeless Architecture, right? Also being mindful of time here. The other side of Codeless Architecture, which is the renderer, right? We showed you how now I can define objects in Salesforce and ServiceNow. I can migrate them into Unqork. I'm going to get a bunch of reusable snippets, and so on and so on. I can continue to build. This could be, maybe even just migrating entirely those systems or integrating with them. The other side of it is, but all of this is still rendered in Unqork, right? It's in Unqork. But we're talking about a Codeless Architecture world, again, where this runtime engine can also be anything. So I want to show an example of the runtime engine being anything, okay? And for that, we're actually going to use Slack as an example. All right, so what we set up was, we set up a Slack application called Codeless, and I gave it a command called Codeless. You're probably familiar with /Zoom, kick off a Zoom meeting, /Giphy, go search some GIFs, make someone laugh. Now you can type in, at least in our Slack, /Codeless, okay? So I'm going to jump over and I'm going to hop into Slack, and I'm just going to do that. I'm going to type in /Codeless, and then I'm going to type in help. And it's going to say, hey, this is the only Slack app you'll ever need. And I'll hit commands, and it's going to give me back the available commands. So I can do a few different things already. I could do Codeless Customer. I can do Codeless Create. So Codeless Customer is going to add a record into Salesforce directly from Slack. Codeless Create is actually going to create a brand new element in Unqork for you. So let's start, though, since my other Salesforce demo just broke on me. Let me show you a Salesforce demo through Slack. I'm going to type in Codeless Customer. Okay, that's going to render now for me a UI within Slack to add a new customer information. So we'll say the legal business is Slack. We'll say the point of contact is Slacky McSlack. We'll talk about the deal. We'll say that they are signed, and we say they signed yesterday. All right, I'll hit submit, and that's going to send me back a Salesforce URL. And voila, the data's in Salesforce. All right, so now using Codeless, and of course, Salesforce has their own Slack app. I know that, but through the Codeless interface, you can now integrate with Slack as one of many possible examples. Now, why that's so cool in my mind is how that actually is happening under the covers, right? So all it takes to build any endpoint like this, like send data into Slack, and I'll show you a couple other ones, is to build a module in Unqork. This is exactly what we saw on the Slack side, right? These are the same fields. I even got my little money mouth face emoji, right? This is built in Unqork, rendered within Slack. Okay, because we're able to take that Codeless definition, transform it into what Slack needs to render in their UI on the fly, and they render it out for us. right? And then when Slack goes and you hit this submit button inside of Slack, Slack then calls back interactivity. That's when I send it over to Salesforce. Okay. So let's do, let's build one though. I think it'd be more fun if we actually built one on the fly, right? To see how easy it was to do what I just showed. Okay. So again, in order to do that, you need two things. You need one module to create a command, which is going to be your UI module. So let's do that. And let's call this /Halo, because I know a lot of you all like that Halo demo. And we'll say get rank for a gamer. Okay, and we're just going to call this Slack command Halo, and we'll say the tag of a Slack command. Okay? I like organization. I'm going to do that. All right, cool. And it's get rank for a gamer. Now, in order to get the rank for a gamer, what do I need? I need a text field, right? And we'll call that gamer tag. Okay. I'm going to hit submit. Now, I'm just going to jump over to Slack. I'm going to do codeless help. Look at those commands again, and bam, my Halo command is now available. All right, so now I'm telling people, hey, do you want to get the rank for a gamer? Cool, just type in codeless Halo. So I'll type in codeless Halo, and boom, there's my gamer tag. Okay, but obviously I can't submit it or anything. I can't do anything with that gamer tag. So it's just there. But bottom line is just like that, I've now built a UI that's rendered in Slack. Okay, all within codeless standard, all within Unqork. So now I'm going to jump over. I'm going to create the second part of this. Okay, and that's going to be, we'll call this /Halo interactivity. And we'll call that Halo, we'll call it Slack interactivity Halo. And this is technically going to be an API module. Even though in the interest of time, I'm not going to follow the API spec. I'm very sorry to everybody. All right, I'm going to come in here and say, all right, well, what do I want to do when I get the gamer tag? All right, well, the first things first is I'm going to accept the gamer tag. Okay. And now I actually want to go call out and get your gamer tag. Okay, so for that, I'm going to take a plugin. And I'll call that, let's call it plug. And I'm going to call an external service. I'm going to call my Halo service. The Halo service has this endpoint over here called, get the gamer tag. Okay, so I'll drop that in. I will do that. Okay, and then I'm going to say gamer tag is the gamer tag. Right? I'll drop in an initializer. That'll be in a new submission. I'm going to have it trigger the plugin. Okay. And now, just for fun, just execute that, see that it's going to work, right? So I'll open up my server-side debugger, and I'm saying the key is gamer tag, and the value is that. I hit execute. All right, and in my debugger, I should now see that in my plugin, I've gotten some data back. So let's go data. Let's take my crossplay, because I think that's where my best one is. Current. All right, cool. So this is, I've got my data. Now I want to show that data back to the person in Slack. So we know within plug data to response current, we have here. So let's go into our plugin and let's take two things. I want to take the tier, right? And what do we call them? I want the tier and I want the sub tier. Okay, and then I'll map those out. So I'm going to say data.2.response.current, data.2.response.current.tier, right? And then the next one should be sub tier. I'll put that in tier. I'll put that in sub tier. Is that correct? Yeah, I got it. Okay. And let's just do this one more time. Let's execute it again. And I've got my tier and I've got my sub tier. Okay. Now we're going to add another hidden field here, and we're going to call this one response. Okay. And we're going to put in a calculator. And we'll just have it watch tier. And we'll have it watch sub tier. All right, and then I just want to say that the response equals concatenate tier, we'll put it with a colon space, and then the subtier. All right. And of course, this response is going to be stored as database. Come back here, double check. And now in my response, I have my rank. Okay, cool. So now I just want Slack to be able to call this. So I'm going to grab this ID because I'm going to tell Slack, hey, this is what you should call. I'll come back to my command module, and I'm going to put a button in here. All right, I'll just leave it as submit. I'm going to define it as an event. I'm just going to drop the ID of that module in, hit save. Now I'm going to come back to Slack, and I'm going to go codeless halo again. Now I've got this. I'll put in Gamblend. I'll hit submit. And there I am. I'm a Platinum 1, right? So now I'm able to connect a Halo API directly into Slack. Now, everybody, for the folks on here who are in Unqork, this will work for you today. If you want to go check your rank or your other friends' ranks directly from Slack, it works. I'm going to do one more thing here and just show you again what you can do with Codeless and now kind of tie them both together, right? Take the any IDE and the any render and put it into one package. And I'm going to use the Codeless create command for that. Okay, so the Codeless create command is going to pop me up a UI that's going to say, hey, what do you want to create? Well, I'm going to create a module. And let's call it, let's say, you don't like your HR system. I'm sure you do. There's lots of good ones out there. But let's say you don't. You just want to quickly capture some employee information in Slack. I'll put an employee. I'll say capture new employee information. And then let's say I want their name. I want their date of birth, which is going to be a date. And I want whether or not they work remote, which will be a true false Boolean. Okay, come down here and I'll hit create. And it's going to work for a second. Oh, darn. All right, took a little second. I think it's because I'm streaming here, so my connection's slow, but hey, it went through. And now what do I get back? I get back this new command called Codeless employee. So if I go back and I did Codeless help again, you would see Codeless employee on the list. And I got 2 modules back. Remember, that's all you need to add all this functionality through the Codeless definition into Slack is a command module, which again, using that exact same API I showed you earlier, where we parse things out of ServiceNow into Unqork. I've done it. I've parsed it from Slack into Unqork, and I've now created that module for you, for myself in this case, that I just defined through that text area in Slack, right? Okay, and I come down here and I get an interactivity, and I also auto-generated an API, right? Because I know the inputs, and I'm going to actually save this in Unqork. I'm going to use Unqork as a source of record here, and I know I need a response, right? So I auto-generated a UI and an API just from somebody entering some information into Slack, and now, of course, available to me is Codeless employee. I get back what I said. We'll call it Nick. His date of birth. Actually, my date of birth is coming up. It is next Monday. I was not born in 2022. Obviously, wasn't even born in 92. But I was also not born in 82 because I was not born yet. So hold on to that. And then I say I do work remote. I am sitting in a growingly hot apartment, probably because I'm talking so fast right now. I hit submit. Boom. It gives me a URL back. I jump into Unqork. There's the data that I just saved from Slack. And of course, this module, because of the Codeless definition and the fact that you can render this stuff anywhere, I can come into here. I can put in, I'll just put in Gamble Nick. I'll put it in backwards. I'll say I'll give it a different information. Boom, it saved it again. And now I'm actually going to hop over, and there's all my data, right? Didn't matter if I entered it in Slack. Didn't matter if I entered it in Unqork. All the same logic works and goes to the same place because we're able to leverage the Codeless architecture, the Codeless definition, unlimited IDEs, and unlimited runtimes. Yeah, whew. I don't know. I think that was pretty cool. I hope you think that's cool too, because that was fun. So that's just, that's scratching the surface. That's 49 minutes minus my spiel and presentation in the beginning of some of the things that you can do today with Codeless architecture. But you actually, I don't want to forget anything here, because I want to tell you one other thing about this, right? Because here you're basically saying, while I think this example goes to show a lot, you still have to pull it out of ServiceNow and pull it into Unqork. Okay, maybe that's not great. Maybe that's not what you want to do. Okay, maybe Then you go make a change in ServiceNow, and all right, well, now I'm going to have to pull in new information. And I don't want it to be that way. I want it to be entirely dynamic, right? Because didn't I tell you earlier that could be any IDE and any runtime? But here I'm basically saying, all right, well, it's the ServiceNow IDE, then it's the Unqork IDE, then it's the runtime. Doesn't need to be that way. Well, I think this is going to get people very far. The ability to quickly build new UIs in front of some of these older systems, to tie together multiple systems. Again, check out that demo on Codeless Architecture, where we're actually stitching together Salesforce, ServiceNow, Airtable, Power Apps, all of it, right? It could be through an Unqork. But we have customers today that on the fly are rendering their definition. So there are, again, other definitions in other formats being translated into the codeless definition on the fly and being then rendered on the fly. All right. And I obviously can't show you that because those are our customers. That's our customers' information, and that's their secret. But what I can show you is something similar, which is, so here's an example, right? You have a snippet. It's a piece of the codeless definition. Okay. Currently in Unqork, you can upload screenshots to snippets, right? And you can see what the snippet would look like in a screenshot, but then of course you could change the snippet. The screenshot might be out of date. What if you can actually see and interact with the snippet, right? Now that would require us, because this is a module, this isn't a module, it requires to render that on the fly. So basically you can take this idea of a preview, and it previews the cost field, right? Using this feature of Unqork, a display dynamic, which basically allows you to, on the fly, construct any codeless definition you have and have it rendered like that. So in this case, we said, hey, I don't want a full module. I don't have an entire thing that I've defined in the codeless definition. I just have one piece of it, and I just want to see what it looks like dynamically. And again, you can imagine how far you can go. Entire applications, again, that we have customers building in Unqork, that they don't really even touch our designer. The only people who touched designer were our brilliant SAs who created that, connection and that transformation, similar to the transformations I created earlier. All right, so I think that's it. I don't think I've forgotten anything else. I'm going to show you this wild, infinite thing here, and then I'm going to stop sharing. And that's how I'm going to wrap it up. I hope this excites you about Codeless Architecture more than I think we have already excited you about Codeless Architecture, and get those wheels spinning about a lot of the amazing things you can build with it. So again, stay hydrated. It's hot out there. It's definitely hot in here. And there's another line to that song, isn't there? But I'm not going to do that. That's not for this Twitch. Maybe the Dr. Snow Twitch, I'll follow through on the next line. But thank you for joining. Again, hopefully you're excited about Codeless Architecture. And as always, we'll see you here next Thursday, 3 p.m. We're going to talk about grids. We're going to talk about grids next Thursday. We'll have our product manager and all the amazing new grids that Unqork offers. Don't miss it. You can do some really cool stuff. So make sure you're back 3 p.m. next Thursday. In the meantime, bookmark codelessarchitecture.org. Subscribe to the mailing list. If you don't have this already bookmarked, bookmark it. Subscribe here. Thank you as always, and have a great day.